Welcome back to Technique WOD. Today we're going to talk about push presses. Two things. First, I've had people ask me about my elbow position and my hand position. Number one, your elbows need to be up, but they don't have to be up all the way like this. I'd like for you to ideally to be able to keep your hands closed, and for a lot of people that means that they're going to have to drop their elbows just a little bit. That's okay as long as the bar is still on your shoulders and it's not floating out in front of you like this. If you're trying to push press like this where there's this space right here, then that's going to limit the amount of weight that you can do. If you're in a Metcon and you're doing 45 barbell push presses and that's not heavy for you and you can just rock out a bunch of push presses just kind of going like this and just bouncing around, then that's fine. But if you're trying to do heavy push presses, then you got to have it on your shoulders. You need that stable shelf to support that weight, and your elbows have to be up enough to get it to be actually resting on your shoulders and not being only in your hands. Okay? So that's point number one. Point number two is that ideally your hands would be all the way closed. See a lot of people, they get to here and their hands are a little bit open. Again, you see people doing push presses where they get to here and it's light enough where they don't even close their hands and they're just kind of rocking out push presses like this, and they're kind of just going through the motion with super light weight, and they don't even close their hands all the way. Again, that's fine. If you're in a Metcon and you're going for speed, you can have your heels off the ground, you can just be bouncing around with light weight, rocking out reps real fast, no big deal. But with heavy weight, ideally, you would still have your hands all the way closed. That way when you dip, your elbows are up, it's on this stable shelf of your shoulders, and then when you press it out, you already have your hands closed and you don't have to catch it halfway like you might do with a jerk. Same thing with jerks though. Ideally, you'd have your hands closed the whole time. Point number two is a lot of people talk about pushing your head through at the top of the movement, which for a lot of people, I should go this way, which for a lot of people ends up like this. They get the bar not quite all the way overhead, and then to get their head through, they kind of push through like this. Okay, that happens often. If you look at me from here, that happens very often where, to use this pole as a reference, their hands are out in front of them a little bit, and then to make it look like they got a full range of motion, they kind of push their head through like that. If you're in a competition, that might make the repetition count, but ideally from a shoulder health standpoint, instead of pushing your head forward, you would want to pull your hands back overhead like that. Okay? So pushing your head through doesn't necessarily mean exactly what it says, where you push your head forward. It also means, or rather than pushing your head forward, you're going to pull your hands back so your arms are 100% vertical and you're not compensating by falling into that forward head posture position, which is just bad posture no matter where you are. So, if you're at work and you're sitting at your desk like this, this is forward head posture. You're pushing your head through the window all day long, and that's bad posture, and that's going to lead to shoulder injuries and whatnot down the line. So when we think about shoulder health and overhead work, we're thinking about a couple of key things. Number one, forward head posture usually means that you round your upper back also. If you have a round upper back, it's very hard to reach all the way overhead. So you can even try that yourself. We talked about this a little bit in Maximum Mobility. I had the whole audience there that day. Everyone slumps over like this and then tries to raise their hands over their head, and you can't do it. You can't do it as well, rather. If you can get a fully extended thoracic spine, and then when you raise your arms, it's much easier because you have a relatively flat upper back and you're not all hunched over like that. Okay? The other thing, and I give you a little drawing over here. If you have a rounded over upper back, that's going to be hard to reach overhead. The other thing is if I sit chronically in this position, then I tend to get very tight muscles kind of on the back of my neck underneath my traps here. That muscle specifically is called your Levator Scapulae. It's one of your downward rotators of your scapula. So what happens when you reach overhead is that if I'm facing the wall like this, and these would be my shoulder blades on my back here, okay? Usually they're resting kind of, pretty parallel to each other. And when I reach overhead, they rotate up like this, and it makes it where I have more space to reach overhead. So the actual motion that happens at my shoulder joint, if I don't move my scapula, I can go to about here, but then after that, I have to raise and upwardly rotate my scapula to reach all the way overhead. Okay? So if I have to upwardly rotate when I reach overhead, if I start overhead and do something like a pull-up and I'm already upwardly rotated, then I have to downwardly rotate on the way down. So I need strong downward rotators for pulling exercises, for vertical pulling, and I need strong upward rotators when I'm pressing overhead. The reason I bring all this up is that if I'm rounded over like this and that levator scapulae muscle gets very tight, and actually you get a tight pec minor, which is also a downward rotator. If those downward rotators get very tight, it means it's going to be very hard to upwardly rotate when I need to. Okay? And the reason that I need to upwardly rotate, if you look here, if my shoulder sits in the socket just like this, you can see up top here there's this little bone. That's called urochromien. Okay? And so if I lift my arm overhead and I try to reach all the way up, if I don't move my scapula, my upper arm, this part of my arm here, which is this line here, runs into that bone. Ideally, you'd have a little bit of space there where if I upwardly rotate all the way, well now my upper arm doesn't run in, and there's a little bit of space here where my supraspinatus tendon and my bursa sacs and other soft tissue structures that lie between those bones don't get smashed, which means that I don't impinge, and then I'm less likely to get shoulder pain. If I can't upwardly rotate all the way because if I have very tight downward rotators, like I was saying, because I'm in this position all day, then I'm more likely to get shoulder pain because of this impingement type problem. So, again, when we push press or press overhead in any way, I don't want to fall into that position like this. Instead, I want to pull my hands back over my head, and that's how I push my head through the window. So it's kind of a confusing term, but that's what it really means. Pull your hands back, don't push your head forward into that poor posture position, and you'll have better shoulder health for the long term. So I hope that makes sense. If you have questions about it, definitely drop us a line, either on Twitter or on the Barbell Shrugged Facebook page. We can help clear up any confusion. Thanks, guys.